Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning this episode of Nick Egan Times. On this episode, we have an incredible guest. We have the legendary visionary Art Bell. Art is a media innovator whose persistence helped reshape television. When Art first pitched the idea of a 24-hour comedy network, he was told it was a terrible concept, that he knew nothing about comedy or television. Undeterred, Art pushed forward, leading to the launch of the Comedy Channel in 1989, which soon evolved into what we know as Comedy Central today. Art later served as the president of Court TV, building a distinguished career at the highest levels of industry before stepping away in 2018 to focus on writing. Art now is the author of the amazing memoir Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor, a Best Books finalist in both memoir and business categories, and has recently released his debut thriller, What She's Hiding, with a sequel currently in progress. Welcome to the distinguished Art, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Good to be here.
You're most welcome. All right, let's jump straight into it. Firstly, take us back, tell us about your life growing up, your family, and everything relating to that.
That's an open-ended question. Okay, let's see. I was born in New Jersey on the Jersey Shore. Bruce Springsteen was our local bar band when I was growing up, and that was fun. I went to college and majored in economics, strangely enough. And when I graduated, I wanted to be an economist. I had no designs on the entertainment industry at that point. I had done a lot of performing in college and actually in high school and before I developed a love of comedy. I just thought comedy was the coolest thing, partly because I'd watch television, watch these comedians getting laughs in front of huge audiences and realizing that they were not only making those audiences laugh in the studio, but millions of people across the country. And I thought, man, that is a very powerful, powerful thing. And so that started me off on my love of comedy. Um, but I got out of college. I had friends who said, hey, we're going to LA. We're going to be writers. Why don't you come along? And I said, no, no, you guys are going to starve to death. I am going to get a real job. So I got a job as an economist in Washington, D.C., and worked with some really smart people. Those were the days when I was real smart myself. Anyway, oh, excuse me. Anyway, I worked as an economist for a few years and decided I did not want to do that for the rest of my life. I was working on coal transportation studies, and I just was finding it not very interesting. So I decided to go into the entertainment industry and figured I'd get an MBA to launch my entertainment industry career. Now, I wish somebody had told me at that moment, you don't need an MBA to go into the entertainment industry. But they didn't. So I went to graduate school at Wharton. And when I got there, I asked, you know, so what do guys like me who want to get into the entertainment industry, a little bit creative, uh, what do they do for fun around here? And I was told that they do something called the Wharton Follies. And that was like, a send up of Wharton life professors and stuff like that. So I got involved with that. And interestingly, the people who were doing that were, unlike me, mostly people from the entertainment industry who wanted to get down to Wall Street. And I was going in the other direction. Anyway, these people were very, very talented and professionals in some sense. So I did that. It was a very funny show the first year. The second year, I wrote the show. I was the head writer and realized that, like this, I had a little bit of a knack for comedy. Um, so I was looking around for a job my second year, and it was around the time that cable channels were getting started, CNN, and there was MTV, All Music, and ESPN, All Sports. And I said, you know what I really want to do? I want to work at a comedy channel, but there wasn't one, and I was so kind of confused. Like, why wouldn't there be an all comedy channel? But there wasn't. So I just ended up going to work for CBS, which was kind of like working at the post office. I mean, it was really, really trying for me. I was in finance. I was working on reports that nobody read. Uh, and I actually went into my boss one day. And I said, "Look, I work on this report for 6 weeks every quarter, and I handed it out to people, and I asked them if they use it, and they said no, we just throw it away. I said, I'm feeling kind of useless. Is there anything else I can do? And she said, no, we do. This is what we've been doing for the last 10 years. This is what we're going to be doing. And I went back to my office and I said, I got to get out of here. Luckily, a friend of mine who had been at CBS went to HBO. Now, HBO in those days was kind of like Netflix is today. It was the future of television. Everybody wanted to work there. Uh, and he called me up and he said, hey, listen, Art, you got to come work here, man. It's fabulous. He said, these people walk down the hall saying, we are going to change television. I said, all right, I'll come work there, but is there a job? And he said, yeah, well, there is a job. They're looking for somebody with an economics background. And I started laughing because I said, this is going to be my entry into the entertainment business. And it was. Um, I got a job at HBO, and my job was to build a model that forecasted subscribers, which was a pretty perilous undertaking because forecasting anything uh, is risky business. But anyway, I did it. I got noticed a little bit. I started moving up a little bit in the org. Nah, I didn't move up. I moved sideways. And I got into a group called New Business Development, which wasn't really developing new business. They were developing one channel. And this is a fascinating story. HBO was a juggernaut, but they weren't in every television home. So they did research and they found out that there's a couple of reasons why people did not take HBO. One was it was too expensive. And number two, they didn't want that kind of sex, violence, and bad language in their home. Remember, HBO made its reputation by putting uncut movies on television. Not only that, they had some comedy, you know, Robin Williams, Red Fox. I mean, they had really kind of great uncut comedy. So in order to do that, instead of lowering the prices, which would have been the easy way to get more subscribers, they decided they were going to build a new channel that was not going to, I laugh even now when I say it, was not going to have any sex, violence, or bad language. Now, I was hired into this group to work on this particular channel. It was called Festival. And on the first day, I went into my boss's office and I said, listen, I don't want to say this too loudly, but don't people watch television for the sex, violence, and bad language? And she said, shh. The channel failed about a year later, no, 7 months later. It was a good experience for me because I got to talk to a lot of people out in the viewership world about what they liked and didn't like about television. And I snuck in a question whenever I could. And the question was, hey, so what do you think of an all comedy channel? This was in our research. And they'd say, oh, that sounds cool. Anyway, I took all this information, and when this channel died, I didn't really have a job. So I started putting together on my own a description of what this comedy channel might look like and financials and the whole bit because I didn't have anything to do. They said they didn't fire me. HBO was good. They didn't fire me. They said, stick around. We'll find something for you to do. So I put this all together and I got myself together and I called the office of the head of programming at HBO. And I figured I'd pitch her. Her name was Bridget. She was very scary. And I thought she was some kind of a genius because she was the head of programming. And I went in and I said, Bridget, you know, HBO is doing all this great original comedy. I think we should do an all comedy channel. And she says, Arthur, nobody calls me Arthur, but anyway, she said, Arthur, that is the worst idea I've ever heard. And I'm going to tell you why. She said, first of all, no legitimate comedian would be on an all comedy channel. Second of all, it's too expensive. And third, why would HBO risk its reputation putting together a new channel like that when we already have fabulous comedy on HBO now? So she sent me on my way. Uh, and I was devastated for about 30 seconds. And then I said, man, she is so wrong. And I went back upstairs and I put my resume together. And I was going to staple this plan for a comedy channel to my resume and send it to MTV and Disney and all the other guys who are putting together channels. Um, as luck would have it, my boss's boss came by and he said, "What are you working on? You got nothing to do." And I said, "Well, I got this idea for a channel." And he said, "Well, let me see." So I handed it to him, and he read some of it and he said, "Wow, this is really interesting." I said, "You think so?" He goes, "Yeah, we should let the chairman of HBO see this." I said, "Wow, that's cool."
Yeah.
Now, the chairman of HBO at the time was a guy named Michael Fuchs. He had been on the cover of the New York Times Magazine like a month before with the heading, "This is the most powerful man in Hollywood." Okay, now I was about the least powerful man in Hollywood. So the idea that I was going to be talking to Michael Fuchs about my idea for a comedy channel pretty much scared me. But I figured, okay, go, this is game time. I said, okay, to my boss's boss. And I said, let me put together a presentation and get it scheduled and we can do it. He said, no, no, we're going to go over there right now. I said, right now we're going to walk into his office. He said, yeah. He said, yeah, Michael's a friend of mine. He'll let me in. So we go over to his office and I am petrified. So we go into his office and walk past his assistant who says, hey, 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 hey. One of those, like, you can't
Yeah.
go in there. What are you, crazy? And Michael's at his desk and he looks up and he goes, what do you guys want? Like that. And I said, and my boss's boss, his name is Larry. Larry says, Art has a great idea for a channel and I want him to tell you about it. And Michael says, well, the typical way to do this is to make an appointment. And I just wanted to run. But anyway, he said, okay, well, whatever. You're here. Let's hear what you got. So he came over. I did my best. I mean, I had no presentation materials. I had no idea I was going to do this. The last time I said anything about a comedy network was to Bridget, and she told me it was the worst idea ever. So I didn't even say more than 35 words in that conversation. Anyway, I pitched my little heart out. And at the end, Michael said, I like it.
Wow.
And that was a terrifying surprise. Uh, and he said, I'm going to give you some money. I'm going to team you up with the head of comedy at HBO, a guy named Stu Smiley. Yes, his name was Stu Smiley. And he was the head of comedy. And he said, so what I want you to do is do some research, put together a reel demonstrating what your channel would be like, and and put together a presentation on the financials. We'll present it to the top executives here. And if everybody likes it, we'll do it. So I got started on that. I met Stu Smiley. First thing he said to me is, what do you know about comedy? I said, well, I like it. And that was pretty much the extent of it. you know, I mean, I was really out of my depth. But Stu was a guy, he knew all the comedians, he knew all the managers. He had been working in comedy for years and years. Anyway, we teamed up, we put this stuff together. I go to the presentation and I'm giving the presentation. All the top executives from HBO are there. I figured this is got to be one of the most important presentations I'll ever give in my career. So I give my presentation. And at the end of the presentation, people applauded. Michael did something I found very interesting. He said, I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask each one of you individually, and there were about 25 executives there, what you think of Art's idea and his presentation. And I want to know that you are supporting this channel. And I wondered for a long time why he did that, but I realized now why he did it. Because he didn't want somebody showing up 6 months later saying, I knew this was a terrible idea. He wanted everybody on board. He wanted everybody on the record as being on board.
Yeah.
And when you think of it, it's rather brilliant. Anyway, so he goes around the room and everybody says, oh, yeah, it's great. No, this looks very exciting. Yes, let's do it, Michael. And he gets to Bridget and I'm holding on to my seat because Bridget hated it. And he says, Bridget, what do you think about it? And she says, Michael, I think it's wonderful. And that was that. And we went
Wow.
from there. Michael said he wanted it on the air in 6 months. We put it on the air in 6 months. Day one, we got on the air. I was so scared. The first week, we got the worst reviews possible. See, now, this is interesting. one of the reasons I wrote the book is because people think that since Comedy Central has been a very successful channel for a long time, people think that it's kind of always been there and always been successful, right? It hasn't. I mean, I went to work the first year every day expecting to be fired, that they were going to shut it down. Things were that bad. I mean, I think that I think it was the New York Times who said this is not funny in any way, shape, or form. Um, and people were really ready to take Michael down. Michael Fuchs, the most powerful man in Hollywood. They couldn't wait for him to flop, and here was a flop. But we kept going. We kept working on it, and Michael called us in one day, which is where the title of my book came from. He said, "You know, it took a comedy channel to get me to lose my sense of humor," and nobody laughed. I mean, we're all in there, and comedy is not a funny business. We were not having that much fun trying to get this channel started, but eventually we did, and that's what I want. You know, that's why I wrote the book because I want. The book is really about um, hanging in there. The book is really about against all odds, can you tough this out and make it successful? When people are throwing terrible, terrible uh, things in your way. Just like I mean, I remember. I mean, this may not sound like much, but my mother called me up and she said, "My friends watch the channel and they said it's not funny." Now that's a bad phone call, right? That's a bad phone call. But that was our lives in the first year, and I felt responsible. I had there were 400 or 500 people working there at the time. Channel goes down, they're out of jobs, and these are very talented people. Um, so that was how things got started.
What why wasn't it successful at the start? Like, what actually was the hindrance? Why wasn't, and what actually, even more than that, what actually got the momentum for it to take off in his originally?
Well, um, really, the hindrance was since we worked so quickly to get the channel up and running, we didn't have the necessary volume of programming. And you think about programming a 24-hour, 7-day a week comedy channel for the rest of your life. I mean, that's how it looks. You have to shovel a lot of programming into that maw. You really do. I mean, I, I guess, I mean, we did models and we planned for it and everything else. Meanwhile, after the first or second day, we realized we were so short on programming that we couldn't really, we didn't know how we were going to pull it off. But we had a couple of things going on in our favor regarding programming, which is we didn't have a lot of distribution. I mean, we didn't have a lot of eyeballs on the channel when it first launched. Yeah, the reviewers were harsh. So we had a little bit of a runway to add programming. Um, Now, my approach was throughout my career, actually, but I, I developed it here was okay, how are we going to make this successful? Let's look at what's working and do more of that. Let's look at what's not working and do less of that. Um, and what started to catch on a little bit was the stand up comedy. We had stand up comedy on the channel, um, but not only that, some of the people on the channel were starting to catch on. We gave Jon Stewart his first real job in television. I mean, and I'll tell you something. When Jon Stewart showed up on the air, like the first day, I'm watching this guy. I said, "Oh my God, this guy is so good. This guy is such good television. He's going to be a star." Well, I guess I didn't have to be too clever to figure that out. But anyway, guys like that were catching on. Now we had to remember we had to sell this channel to advertisers, and we had to sell it to cable operators because they had to put it on their channel lineup. And they hated the channel. They just hated it. They thought it was stupid. Stupid idea, bad execution. Haven't seen it, but I heard it's terrible. Then things started changing because what happened is we'd start going to those meetings. And they said, I don't see what this channel's all about, but my 19-year-old kid loves it. And that's when we realized we had something. Young kids, not kids, but I mean, basically the MTV audience of 18 to 34 started to like the channel. And this was early on. I mean, it's not like we were getting fabulous ratings. But the other thing I had to do along the way is keep people pumped up. And I always looked for glimmers of hope. And that was a glimmer of hope. Another glimmer of hope, we had kind of a cult hit early on. It was called Mystery Science Theater 3000. And that was a comedian, Joel Hodgson, and his two robot pals sitting there watching movies and making funny remarks about the movies. And it came in the mail, honestly. It came in the mail the first week we were on the air. And with a note saying, hey, you guys are doing a comedy channel. Is this something you'd be interested in? And we were like, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. We flew out to Minneapolis the next day and did a deal. And that thing became a cult hit. So, what made the difference? Little things made the difference. Little things started to catch on. And then I'll tell you one of the big things that caught on was about a year later, we did something called um, we covered the State of the Union address live in the same way that MST would cover it. We had a comedian, that was the idea, talking during the State of the Union address. And my my camera's getting wonky here. Sorry, 1 second. I'll fix it. Nobody wants to look at me that close. Better. Okay. So this was an idea that came up, State of the Union address, and we called it the State of the Union Undressed. The first comedian we got to do it was a guy named Al Franken, who later became Senator Al Franken, who later got thrown out of the Senate because he was caught doing something not very funny years earlier, and they threw him out of the Senate. Anyway, Al Franken was a guy. We did the State of the Union Undressed. It was picked up in the news media, and the Los Angeles Times said, it looks like this comedy channel has really got something to offer because they've done something that's never been done before, and they're really doing some fabulous stuff. So that was our first, really good review that put us on the map. And listen, a lot of people worked very hard, for the years I was there and for the years after I was there to make it successful.
Wonderful. And can you describe when it was fully taking off the comedy channel? How was it? How could you describe what it was like standing there in the moment?
Well, I do. This is something I try to infuse the book with, which was my view of how it felt. And I remember walking down on the first day we were gonna start the channel, and we were gonna turn it on at 6 o'clock at night, and we were gonna have a little party, little launch party when they hit the button, and we're gonna have a little countdown, and somebody was gonna hit the big red button. And Michael Fuchs was there, and Michael came up to me and said at the party, and I was just like terrified. I had gotten this whole thing started, and I didn't know if it was going to be successful, but I had to put on my game face. I had to say, "This is going to be great, man. We're going to have a good." But deep down, I was terrified. And Michael said, "You know what? When you start a channel like this, it's for the rest of your life. You got to keep doing it forever." And that was scary. That was really scary. Anyway, that was one moment. There were other moments along the way in that first year where there was joy, when Mystery Science Theater 3000 took off, uh, and there was terror when Michael called us in and said, I think I may have to shut you guys down, because this is not working. Um, but you go back and you say, all right, we're not fired. We got to get back to work, and we got to do our best to make this thing successful. And I talk about the people that were there, and they were very talented people, and they all wanted the same thing. They all wanted a comedy channel to be in the world because comedians and comedy writers and comedy performers deserved it. And they wanted to have a home for themselves, you know? And that's what it turned out to be. We had, even early on, local comedians who were working in New York would come down to the studio and hang out, you know, just because they wanted to be there. They were so excited that somebody was throwing a channel in their honor, and that's how they viewed it. And to me, that was so heartwarming. That's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see a place for comedy, you know. So that was the good part.
Great. What are your thoughts on Comedy Central now? Like, obviously it's evolved. Yeah, what's your opinion of it now? When you see it, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think that Comedy Central has been successful and will be continue to be successful because it's really kind of established itself as the center of the comedy universe. And that's no mean feat. So the advantage of being the center of the comedy universe is people bring their best stuff to you first. I mean, South Park's a great example. South Park came into the channel. I was still there then, and MTV wanted it in the worst way, but they came to us because we were the comedy network. And you know that's what made the channel great. What they're doing now, you know, listen, I'm not going to pick it apart. They've got great programming. They've got and a great brand. So I look in my rearview mirror and say I'm so proud of it. That's all. You
Should be. It's incredible. It's truly remarkable. It's your legacy too. You know, you always have that for the rest of your life. It's incredible.
know. Yeah. Well, you know, I got fired, and I remember when I got fired, it's because they changed presidents. I wasn't the president. I was the head of programming and marketing, and I remember thinking, what do you have to do to keep a job in this business? How about you how about you start the whole channel up and it's successful? Does that let you keep your job? The answer is no. I mean, one of the things that people note about my book is, and they ask me about this, they say, do people get fired that much in television? Because, you know, I'm telling the story and one guy after another, one gal after another, they're getting fired, you know, but I say, yeah, that's the business. So, but I never expected to be fired. And that I never saw that coming. And that was really hard for me. It was a moment of truth. And I realized at that moment something I hadn't realized before, which is you don't have to do something really bad to get fired. And the people who got fired and came to me looking for jobs from then on, I didn't think that their getting fired meant anything about their capabilities.
Yeah, that's great insights, and thank you for sharing. Because yeah, it would be incredibly difficult. You know, you've created something, then you give them a tap on the shoulder. Yeah, that's tough. Um, what was the best piece of advice you ever received?
Um, it was around that time that one of the industry moguls, because you know I started going around talking to people about getting my next job, and this guy said, "Hey, you know what? In this business, if you don't get fired once in a while, it means you're not doing anything interesting." And that, you know, that really explained a lot. I used to go back to HBO and see the people who were still there after like 15 years, you know, and these were people who kept their head down, not the people who, you know, charged ahead and said, "Hey, let's try something." Uh, and you know, I recognized that if you're gonna get things done, you're gonna have to take chances, and things may not always work out, and you may get fired. The end.
Well, all right, if you're 18 again, and you could go back in the time capsule and you could change anything, it could be personally or professionally, what would you change?
About my life.
Yeah.
You know, I've thought about that a little bit, and it's easy for me to say, I look back and I would do things exactly the same way. Um, and it's hard for me to really pinpoint anything I would have done differently or changed. I sometimes think I wish I had more confidence at the beginning, you know, and that was a very hard thing for me to deal with at the time, that I didn't have a lot of confidence. I did gain confidence over time, but I wish, so many people go into that business kind of cocky, and that's a better way to be, I think. And I wasn't like that. On the other hand, that might have helped me a little bit in my management style, but I was not confident. I was not confident at the early days.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate it. It's incredible your career, everything you've done. I've really been fascinated by everything you shared. It's truly remarkable, and yeah, you should be incredibly proud of everything you've achieved and even what you're doing now with the books. And yeah, I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you so much, Nick.
You're welcome.